This video is meant to be a supplement for the Houdini courses offered at Becker College and Lesley University. In this video, I'd like to demonstrate the glue adjacent tool that is located in the rigid body shelf. What we found is that the best use of the glue adjacent button is to take two existing rigid body objects and glue them together. So in the reference scene I have here, there's a sphere and a torus, and they've both been translated up inside, I should say they've been translated up on the y-axis inside their geometry networks. They each have a transform node. Again, just to reiterate what we've discussed in class, the reshaping the geometry objects inside their geometry network tends to yield the best results or the most predictable results, as opposed to in particular, reshaping in terms of scale up here at the object level. So we want to try to do that in here, either at the shape level, using center and uniform scale and so on, or if we want to be even less destructive and more non-destructive, then we want to put that into a transform node. So I'm going to go ahead and convert both of these objects into rigid bodies. So I'm going to use the RBD objects button here in the rigid body shelf. So I'll select the torus and make that an RBD object, and then I'll select the sphere and make that an RBD object. And what should have happened is a DOP network is created, and it is, and in here we have both of our objects listed right there as two RBD objects. I'm going to go ahead and put a ground plane in as well, so I'll go to the collision shelf and put a ground plane in. And we should have just a basic simulation here. If I turn on my real-time playback button and hit play, the object should fall and separate when they hit the ground. So what I want to do is I want to glue these together, and I'm going to do this with the glue adjacent button. So as that name suggests, this is to glue objects together that are adjacent or near each other. And this is looking for us to select RBD objects. So I need to do this in the DOP network. So I'm going to go into the DOP network, and I'll hit L to lay out my nodes here. And I'm going to click on the glue adjacent button. And this is one of the buttons that, or tools, that it's very important to look at what it's instructing us to do here at the bottom of the viewport. It says select RBD objects to glue together, press enter when complete. So I'm going to select the sphere, and I'm going to shift select the torus. And it's very important that we keep our cursor in the viewport when we hit enter. If we put our cursor somewhere else, like over here in the network window, sometimes it tends to not take for some reason. So we just want to make sure that we're doing an active selection in the viewport, so we keep our cursor in the viewport, and then I'll hit the enter key, and it should work properly. So here in my auto DOP network, we see that Houdini has generated my glue constraints right here, all of the nodes needed for the glue constraint. So they're just essentially brought together right underneath our static objects, which would be the ground plane, and our RBD objects, which are the torus and the sphere. So if I play this, they'll probably still fall apart because the glue network just isn't strong enough to hold them together. So if we want to change the overall glue strength between these two objects, we can do that in the glue constraint relationship node. So let me pull my parameters window open a little more here. And right there it is at the top, strength. So I'm just going to add another 0 to that, and then I will hit play again, and now we see that those objects stay together. So let's take a look at where this glue constraint is actually being generated. And when we use the glue adjacent button, where it's generating that glue constraint is up here at the object level in a separate geometry node. So that's this one here. It's very descriptive, which is nice. It says glue sphere object to torus. So that makes sense. Now, this is just adding functionality, or the glue constraint. It's not something that needs to be displayed. So we see that there's no display flag activated on this geometry node. So if I double click on it, we can see here are the nodes that it's using to generate the glue network. So I'm going to rewind to the beginning, and the node in particular that's actually generating this is the connect adjacent pieces. If I put my display flag on it, we can see right there That one thin line is telling me that these two objects are connected to each other. So I'm going to put my display flag back down here at the attribute create. I believe that's the level that we need to have the display flag on in order for this to work properly. And I'll just play it again to make sure I didn't break anything. Yep, and it's fine. I think that's, we had noticed this in class the other day too. So if I come back in here and I put my display flag on the out node, let's see if it still works. No, and it doesn't. So, we've always talked about how, in particular, out nodes or nulls are a great way to end our path of nodes. But in this case, if I push the display flag down here, for some reason it breaks the network. I'm not quite sure why, but we did notice that in class. So the display flag needs to stay here on the attribute create. And then again, if I come up here and play it, it seems to run properly. So what we can do is we could do something very simple here to help to animate this property as well. We can just animate a switch that turns this constraint on or off. And I'm going to go back to the DOP network to do that. So in the DOP network, I'm going to go to the glue constraint relationship, and this is where I can turn it on and off. Now we can animate the strength value of the glue, but I found that to be problematic. You have to wrestle with it a lot to get it to work properly. And sometimes when you drop the strength to 0, the object still won't quite fall apart. So if you want them to just fall apart at a certain point in time, animating the activation parameter seems to work a little bit quicker and more efficiently. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my simulation off so that I can set some keys here. It's a good idea to turn the simulation off, then Houdini doesn't try to simulate while we're running back and forth on the timeline. Now the simulation is cached, as we can see by the blue line, so it's still looking like it's simulating, even though I turned the simulation off. It's basically, when we turn the simulation off, whatever was in cache will stay there. So I'm going to come out here to right after the first bounce. So it's in the air right now with a slight bounce. And I'm going to set a key on activation. I'm going to alt click on it and it should turn green. So what I'm doing is I'm setting a key at frame 26 that forces the activation to stay at 1, meaning that that glue constraint is active. And then I'll just slide down 1 frame to 27, or I could even go 1 frame farther. I'm at 28. The object is still in the air, and I'm going to set the activation to 0, and then alt click on it to set that key. So we see that it goes from 1 to 0, just over a couple frames. So that should break the constraint apart. Now, whether there's enough force on these subsequent bounces to break it apart, we'll see. So I'm going to turn my simulation back on and rewind and play, and let's see what happens. Oh, and there we go. Good. So it does. It falls apart. So there was enough force there to have it fall apart once I disabled the glue constraints. So that's a quick and straightforward way of having two RBD objects stay together for a certain period of time and then come apart at some point in the animation.